Hello everyone. Ito si P. Renada ng Rappler. Nandito tayo ngayon sa Glasgow, kung saan ginaganap ang United Nations Summit, also known as COP26. So, 26th Conference of Parties. Today is November 8th, Monday. Here it's 10 a.m. And I'm doing this Rappler Recap for all of you to give you an update on what has been accomplished so far at COP26, given that it's the halfway mark. So, first week was October 31 to November 7. I want to recap to you what happened in the first week and also give you an idea of what we expect in the second week. So, pasensya na sa mga gusto Tagalog yung video or Filipino yung video, pero napaka-complicated ng climate change terms. So, hindi kaya ng powers ko. I will just speak mostly in English. So, sorry about that. Alright, so what happened in the first week, October 31 to November 7? It started with a bang. We had 120 heads of state attend the summit on the first few days, and this is the most number of heads of state since COP21 in Paris in 2015. So you get an idea that it was a big political moment, the first few days of the COP. We had lots of announcements and pledges, major pledges during the first week. For example, individual countries made new financial pledges, like United States a few days before the COP, Spain, Japan, Denmark. They gave new climate finance pledges, funding pledges at the start of the COP. Then we also had new promises to cut greenhouse gas emissions from certain countries, like yung India, nag-promise sila na they will achieve net zero by 2070 and 50% of their energy should be renewable energy by 2030. So that's a big promise. Imagine, only 10 years from now, gusto nila half of their energy source is already RE. So that's a big promise. And we also saw a lot of collective pledges, major collective pledges in the first week. Like we had the Glasgow Declaration on Forests and Land Use, where over 100 countries promised to halt deforestation by 2030. There was also a global methane pledge started by the US and European Union before the COP26, but this pledge grew during COP26. So mas maraming bansa ang sumali sa pledge na to. And basically the pledge is to reduce methane emissions by 30% below 2020 levels by the year 2030. So if you put all of these pledges together, even the other individual pledges of countries to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, sabi ng International Energy Agency that could put us on track for just 1.8 degrees warming by 2100. So that's a big deal, because before the COP, before Glasgow started, yung trajectory was 2.7 degrees warming. So imagine, in just a few days of negotiations, they were able to bring down the possible warming to 1.8 degrees. But, of course, those are just pledges. They're just verbal, written promises. We have yet to see this really happening on the ground. And since all of these pledges, many of them are supposed to be met in 30 years, right? or 50 years. So we will see if this would actually happen. But I mean, diba, that's something that napababa in a way. Okay, so but the real work for COP26 begins when the world leaders leave. So actually, nung first few days, despite the big announcements, the real work really is when wala na yung mga world leaders, and the negotiators from all the governments who are here in Glasgow can actually get to work. And what do we mean by negotiations, no? Ibig sabihin nun, all governments who signed on to the pledge to halt global warming, they send delegates to the COPs, and yung mga delegates na yun have to negotiate the position of their countries so that yung interest ng countries nila will also be taken into consideration dun sa global pledge, right? Because you cannot, as a country, you cannot help in a global pledge if hindi consistent yung pledge na yun with what your country wants for their economic development, for the rights of your constituents in that country. So it's important that delegates from governments really try to embody what their governments need para consistent yung local plans dun sa global plans. And so the way negotiations work, negotiators form blocks depending on which interests are kumbaga consistent with their countries. For example, yung Philippines, part siya ng G77 plus China bloc. There's also the least developed countries bloc. There's the bloc for the oil producing countries. There's the bloc for the richer nations. So parang these, basically itong mga blocks, groups to ng mga countries who are like-minded, who have the same interests, and so they team up together, they team up so that they can push for the same things kasi strength in numbers, diba? You can have more influence if you're a bigger group. So ganun yung logic behind negotiating blocks. So the Philippines obviously is part of these negotiating blocks, and basically the negotiations involve lots of meetings, informal meetings between countries, between negotiators to try to hash out specific text. So in negotiations, it's all about words. It's really wrangling with words kasi yung end product ng COP26 and all COPs are agreements, and agreements are made of words. And so you will see in negotiations, negotiators trying to make the text go their way. So they suggest words like shall, will, technical assistance versus so and so. So parang specific wording. There are countries that fight for certain wording. Other countries try to block that wording because it's too strong for them. So ganun yun. So during the whole COP, we have such a thing as bracketed text. So ito yung text na puro parenthesis, puro brackets kasi kumbaga hindi pa final yung wording at pinagde-debate pa kung ano yung final wording. So yun yung what we mean when we say negotiations in COP. Okay, so ano na nangyari so far? Important last night, Sunday, the COP presidency, which is basically the UK government, released a summary of elements that will go into what we call the COP cover decision. So for COP26, it's called 1.CP26. And basically, it wraps up the whole COP in one document. And usually nangyayari to when there's a big expectation for the summit. Like, people expect a big outcome for the summit. So yung COP cover decision is that document, yung outcome document. And last night, the COP presidency, the UK government, released kumbaga parang a draft, a summary of a draft, kung ano na yung current status ng decision na yon and yung document na yon. And so I will wrap up for you what that document says. Basically, it's telling you kung ano na yung accomplished so far ng mga negotiators dito. So I'll divide it into three topics which are most important to the Philippines as a developing country, as a climate vulnerable country. So the first is the keeping 1.5 degrees Celsius target alive. The second is climate finance and adaptation finance, and the third topic is loss and damage. So these are the three very important, I would say most important for the Philippines given our situation. So dun sa 1.5 degrees target, first of all, we have to explain why important tong 1.5 degrees. Kasi sinasabi na ng scientists na if we go beyond 1.5 degrees warming, we will see climate effects that we have never seen before, like super too apocalyptic to imagine. So imagine typhoons that are stronger than what we can imagine, droughts that are more intense than what we can imagine. That's what we will see if the world warms by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So yung 1.5 degrees, to stay below that, countries have to lower their emissions individually. Kasi collectively, we need individual action para collectively the world can reduce the amount of carbon emissions in the atmosphere. So yung mga countries, nag-submit tayo ng pledges ng Paris Agreement, and these pledges are supposed to be our voluntary promises to reduce our country's emissions. So yung nangyari dito dun sa cover document is, number one, is ang assessment ng mga experts on what the document looks like so far is there is still no clear language on pushing countries who only moderately improved their NDC, nationally determined contribution. So itong NDC, itong pledge nga of each country to reduce emissions, nasubmit na ng maraming countries, but there is a call kasi to improve that, to be more ambitious, meaning to reduced by a lot more than was promised. And nag-update ang mga countries ng kanilang NDC. The Philippines updated its NDC. We submitted last April, a few months ago, and other countries have also revised their NDC. Pero maraming countries ang hindi pa nag-submit, and may clear language doon sa cover document na you have to submit. Kung di pa kayo nag-submit, mag-submit na kayo. Yun yung isang language doon. Pero, sinabi ng experts, yung missing dun sa document is, bakit walang language telling countries na sobrang onti lang yung improvement ng NDC to improve more. Kumbaga, be more ambitious. And one example of this is Russia. Diba? Onti lang yung improvement ng kanilang NDC. Right. So, also, dun sa topic na to, there is no clear explanation of how countries should accelerate their plans to reduce emissions and to transition to clean energy. So, yung 1.5 degrees kasi, hindi lang dapat promise yan. Kailangan may roadmap talaga of how we're gonna do it, or else it's just going to be a promise, diba? So it has to be operationalized, and sabi ng experts, so far wala pang clear language on that, like the actual timeline, parang the actual roadmap, the steps we will take. Okay, next topic, climate finance and adaptation finance. Experts say it's not yet clear how the scaling up of these funds will happen. So just to give you background, this climate finance means funding to help countries, number one, adapt to the impacts of climate change, like help the Philippines, for example, survive typhoons, diba? Give us maybe the weather monitoring facilities to be able to adapt better to weather these typhoons, things like that. So also like mitigation finance naman, it's about helping the Philippines, for example, move beyond coal and invest more in renewable energy. So, syempre yung mga ganyang policies, they require financing, diba? Hindi yan libre. Kailangan lagyan ng investments yan, and lagyan ng funding, programmatic funding for that. So, yung climate vulnerable countries, of which kasama ang Pilipinas, ang gusto natin, 50-50. So, we want yung sa finance, 50% will go to mitigation, 50% will go to adaptation. Sadly, as of the moment, wala pang clear language on itong 50-50 number. So far, yung nasa document is just a reference to a balance. So gusto nila, which is a good thing naman, na may parang idea of striking a balance between mitigation and adaptation. But yun na nga, countries want to see a more specific number on that. Lastly, loss and damage. Important yung loss and damage because it just means how do we help countries like the Philippines or small island Pacific states who are already experiencing climate change impacts like typhoons, sea level rise, and these impacts are already eating into their economies, right? So for example, yung Philippines, every year, typhoons eat up a chunk of our GDP. Diba? They're like parang a certain percentage of GDP, ganun kalaki yung cost ng typhoons para sa atin, yung agricultural damage, diba, crop loss. It costs us millions, sometimes billions of pesos every year, and this is climate risk, climate-induced damages, right? So the developing countries want a mechanism in the United Nations that will help acknowledge the losses we have incurred and compensate us for this. Kasi hindi naman natin kasalanan na lumalakas ang mga bagyo. Kasi yung emissions natin, 0.3% lang ng global emissions, whereas for example United States, China, mas malaki yung kanilang responsibility or accountability for the emissions. So parang yung sinasabi ng mga developing countries, dapat tulungan ninyo kami na bayaran ang damages na to. So yun yung concept ng loss and damage. So sabi ng experts so far, very weak yung language dito sa loss and damage. Hindi siya solution oriented daw. Wala siyang parang set mechanism yet how this will happen. It's a little bit it's very weak yung sinabi nila. Now yung isang medyo concrete na nangyari na before on this is the creation of what's called the Santiago Network. So it's basically a network, a mechanism created in past COPs wherein para siyang network where a developed nation, a vulnerable nation can ask for help from experts, entities, groups, and then parang they will be given access to assistance from these entities. So para siyang way to connect you, diba? Parang, uy, tulungan mo naman ako. Okay, ito yung group na baka gusto tumulong. Parang, may call out ang Pilipinas para sa compensation. Baka we can help them, etc. So, parang ganun yung Santiago Network. And yung nangyari dito sa COP, yung mga gusto ng mga bansa is kailangan malink tong Santiago Network sa ibang mechanism. Kailangan ma-incorporate siya para mas maganda yung paggamit niya and mas incorporated, mas makakatulong talaga sa vulnerable nations to access the money they need to deal with these climate effects, to move on from these climate destruction. So, yun yung nangyari. Okay, last part of this explainer, just want to give caveats also dun sa accomplishments in this COP so far. I mean, because maraming major announcements, but we just want to also put them into context, no? Like, for example, yung ating NDCs, yung ating voluntary pledges, hindi pa siya klaro how these pledges of countries will get to their net zero goals. So yung net zero, di ba, parang ang sarap pakinggan, parang by 2070, net zero na yung India, etc. But hindi reflected yung goal na yon dun sa actual pledge na sinabi ng India under the Paris Agreement. So, parang malaking gap yon basically. Then, dun sa deforestation pledge, it's been done before in 2014 and it failed. So, we have to see how this pledge will be better than that. Also, the methane pledge naman is, the bad thing about that is it's not under the voluntary pledges of countries. It's not under the NDCs. So, walang reporting mechanism yung methane pledge. And yung posibleng mangyari this week is that countries will, the parties will try to put some language in the cover decision that basically will require countries to update again their NDCs to reflect the methane pledge. Nakita actually natin yon sa cover decision na release kagabi. So, what else? Yeah, so dun sa climate finance, yeah. Yun. So that's what we will see this week naman. This is the second week of COP26 since it's November 8th. This COP is supposed to last till November 12th. And this will definitely be a very busy week for negotiators kasi they expect more specific language on things like climate finance, which is the big elephant in the room. Medyo malabo pa talaga yung language dun sa climate finance. And sinasabi ng mga experts, normal lang yun kasi first week pa lang naman ng COP. And during the second week, that's when most likely matatackle yung mas specific wording, the more sensitive things. Also, marami negotiators would prefer to ask muna their ministers for the political direction dun sa negotiations kasi maraming negotiations na sa sobrang hirap nila pag-usapan. Kailangan i-consult yung mas higher up sa governments nila. And that's why in the second week, we would have more high-level government officials descending in Glasgow again, and the negotiators will then ask their higher-level officials kung ano na ba talaga, anong position natin dito. And so that's why we will probably get more clarity on what the text will look like when after these negotiators talk to their high-level ministers. What else would happen this week? Yun, basically, it's possible that mag-overtime yung COP. In the past COPs I've covered and reported on, palagi nag-overtime kasi hindi nga ma-agreean on, walang agreement on lots of tricky aspects of the documents. So we will just have to see if mag-overtime or it will end on time. Also important update today, November 8th, it's the 8th year anniversary of Super Typhoon Haiyan, which we know is a symbol of the loss and damage issue. Because diba, Haiyan, ang dami natin na walang funds doon, economic recovery was even affected by Haiyan. So definitely issue siya, and we expect some Filipino protesters to highlight Typhoon Haiyan anniversary today. So baka magka-activity later on, and we will cover this live as well. So please follow us there. Yun. So that's all that I have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning into this live explainer, and we hope that we were able to answer your queries or maybe at least inform you of what's happening so far at COP26. Again, I'm Pierre Nada. Thanks for watching.